Barry SLAUENWHITE knows about helping those in poverty. For 35 years, Barry's worked with Compassion Canada, one of the world's leading child development organizations. Now, Compassion Canada, well known, has a great history of partnering with the local church in 25 countries to end poverty in the lives of children and their families. And my guest says a biblical understanding of poverty taught him not only about God's unending love for humanity, especially his heart for people who are poor and oppressed, but also brought him to the conclusion that poverty at its roots is a spiritual problem requiring a spiritual solution. Barry, great to have you back on 100 Huntley Street.
Always good to be here, Greg.
Okay, we're going to go back 3.5 decades. You're in Mexico, a dusty road. And it was a pivotal point because you had just left the pastorate, you joined Compassion. What happened?
Well, I'll never forget that time because God spoke to me on that dusty little path in a way He had never spoken to me before, and through the most unsuspecting person, a lady named Graciela Esparza, a child psychologist turned pastor, turned evangelist, turned child advocate. And when I was with her, I felt like I was with Mother Teresa. In fact, I still call her the Mother Teresa of Mexico.
Wow.
And she spoke as if she heard directly from God. And that day, she did something and she said something that changed the way I have lived my life. She pointed her little finger in my face and she gave me some instructions. I write about it in my book.
Yes.
But this day is as vivid to me 35 years later as if it happened yesterday.
So what did she say to you?
She basically instructed me to make sure that as I lead this organization called Compassion, that I always keep Christ front and center.
And you know what? That sounds like, okay, you're working for a Christian organization, but over time we can get overwhelmed with the poverty and maybe, I don't know, marginalize the gospel in it?
Absolutely. And you know what happens often is we tend, even though we don't mean to, we tend to give way to the revenue sources. And if the revenue sources aren't keen on the gospel being present, we tend to just cut back a little bit. And before you know it, it's hard to find the gospel.
Well, that's happened in church history.
Oh, yes.
And one of the reasons that we, for our family, for many years supported and sponsored Children with Compassion is because of the emphasis on the gospel. It's Jesus that transformed. So at the beginning I was saying, about poverty, we have to rethink it to understand it because it is a spiritual problem.
Absolutely. And if we don't understand what happened in Eden, the Garden of Eden, we really don't have the facts we need to address poverty. And so in my book, I take people right back to Genesis and I unpack the theology of poverty in that the world that God created was perfect. There was no word for need or want or poverty until one day Adam and Eve did something terrible. That sin, that disobedience marked mankind forever. And this perfect world that God created, now poverty became and is still today the default setting of every human being that is born.
So we see poverty, we see the symptom of it. You know, we see people all around the world and we need to meet their needs, no question. One of the things that, and you hammer it over and over, and you got a great book, and I've been recommending it to anybody that does any kind of, missions work, whether it's here in Canada, overseas, Strategic Compassion, Reuniting the Good News and Good Works in a Fight Against Poverty. Why have we in the church, the big C church, separated those two, the good news from good works?
Wow, there's a lot of history there, right? Because you have what we would call the liberal theology, which is all about the social gospel. And the evangelical side of the equation, they don't like or didn't like the concept of just doing good deeds. They wanted to really concentrate on the proclamation of the gospel. What has happened is over time, there's been this dichotomy, these two courts, if you will. One saying we need to do good, and don't mess it up by throwing Jesus into it, because that's confusing. That's forcing people. And then the other side saying, we need to be all about Jesus. Let's not get bogged down with helping people where they live. In my book, I want to take people through the pages of Scripture and help them understand, A, as we said, the true cause of poverty, and B, how do we treat poverty and not poverty's symptoms?
And break those cycles. Okay, we're going to take a break, Barry. When we come back, I just want to talk about the teachings of Jesus, because it is an unnatural break between the good news, his proclamation, the gospel, and helping the poor, the good works. So we'll solve that when we come back on 100 Huntley Street.